Hey guys, this is Chris from AndroidPit.com. Today we have two super sexy, curvy smartphones with funky cameras going on the back. We have the LG G3 and we have the HTC One M8. Stick with us, we'll take you through all the major categories and see which one comes out on top today. Let's go. Okay, so we have the G3 on the left and the M8 on the right. The first thing you can see is that the M8 is a tall drink of water. It's quite tall and skinny compared to the G3, which is a little bit shorter and a little bit fatter. If we check out the styling, you can see they've both got a curved back, but obviously the M8 has the sort of curved aluminum tray that all of the components fit into, whereas the G3 has the curved plastic with a metallic look on the back. That does mean that the G3 has a removable cover though, which means you can get at the battery and into the micro SD slot, but the M8 has that on the side, so you're not missing out on micro SD. Speakers on the M8 are up front at the top and the bottom, the legendary boom sound speakers, but on the G3 they're on the back. If we take a quick look at the camera modules, you can see what a lot of the fuss is about. The HTC One M8 came with the duo camera for perceiving depth and the dual LED flash, and the G3 with the laser autofocus module, the 13 megapixel camera and the dual LED flash. The HTC has 4 ultra pixels. It's not quite the same as megapixels, but it's still something we'll get into in a little bit more detail in a minute. Okay, so the other big difference up front is the Quad HD display on the G3, which comes in at 5.5 inches versus the 5-inch Full HD display on the M8. So you've got slightly different ratios as well. Both are running Android 4.4.2 at the moment, with an upgrade coming soon, of course. We of course have Sense 6 on the HTC, and we have the new look Optimus UI on the G3. So if we take a look at the app drawer, you can see both are fairly minimal. There's not too much going on worth commenting on, but you can decide which one you prefer the look of. So we've got all of our quick settings in a grid on the M8 and a swipeable bar at the top on the G3. So let's take a quick look at some of the software features. So on the G3 we have a dedicated home screen for the smart tips and LG Health, which is embedded right into the interface. So you can remove this, of course. If you want to get rid of it, you can just pick it up and drag it to remove. But on our home screens we have got lots of space. There's nice crisp colors on the display as well. I know a few people have been concerned about the brightness. I haven't really noticed a problem with the brightness. Of course we've got it dropped down for the video, but the new interface is nice and cleanly laid out. Everything seems pretty snappy. We'll get into some more comparisons in terms of speed and stuff in weeks to come. Take a look at some of the LG apps. You can see that LG's gone for these color-coded apps for task awareness, and they all look pretty nice and work as you would expect. One of the other nice features on the G3 is the smart keyboard. So this is the new LG smart keyboard, and has a few cool things. You can do obviously swipe typing, but you can also change the height. So if you want to, actually you can change the bottom row keys at the bottom as well. So you can also change the height of the keyboard. So depending on how much screen real estate you want taken up by the keys, you can have a giant keyboard, or you can drag it back down and have it take up less room. What other settings do we have? We have a few gestures on the G3. So most of these are related to flipping the phone to answer calls or silence it when a call comes in. There's one-handed operation, of course, and we also have the nice guest mode. Where is guest mode? There it is. So guest mode basically gives you a limited number of apps that you can set. So we've got 5 selected there, but if you want to add a few more, do so. And then you can also set a knock code to access the guest mode directly. So if we turn it off, our normal knock code will take us straight to the home screen. If we do our guest mode knock code, it will take us to guest mode. And of course, knock on, which we're already familiar with, will take us to our lock screen. We now have a nicely laid out recent apps key, which I'm not the hugest fan of, but you can change it around to look however you like. It looks a lot better to me in this sort of more open view. And what else do we have? Let's take a quick look at the camera. So the camera has quite a minimal interface. You can clear everything out with a touch of a button and bring it all back. We also have a fairly minimal set of options. We have dual camera, panorama, magic focus for post-processing of focal points, and of course auto mode. Settings, we have some grids, we have a timer, voice activation, we have our resolution settings and HDR mode, which is super nice. We'll get onto that in the results of the camera in just a sec. Okay, so back on the M8, we obviously have Sense 6 and we have the blink feed home screen. That, if it's not your cup of tea, you can get rid of it, just as we saw on the G3. Just drag it out of the way and remove it. But what else do we have? We have a very different interface look on the M8 for the stock apps. So we have not color coded, but they're all just blue. All of the standard, where are we? All the standard HTC apps just have the nice blue bar at the top, and everything's laid out pretty nice and neatly. There's not too much in it for me in terms of interface. Everything's looking pretty good. There's also Kid Mode by, I think it's Zoodles, on the M8, kind of akin to the Guest Mode on the G3. There's some nice motion launch gestures on the M8 as well, which I'm a bit of a fan of. So you can double tap to wake, just as you can on the G3. But there's some others based on other gestures to go straight to the home screen. You can swipe right to go to blink feed. Probably my favorite motion launch gesture though is the volume down button to launch the camera app. So while the HTC only has 4 megapixels, which is a sort of ultra pixels, which are basically megapixels that capture a little bit more light. The resolution you will notice in the example photos we show you in just a second. But we have fairly basic camera modes as well. Camera video, Zoe mode, which is coming officially a little bit later. But there's some Zoe effects that you can capture for burst mode and shooting video and still shots at the same time. You've got your selfie camera, dual capture of course, and Pan 360, which is kind of like Photosphere. So let's go back and we can take a look at some of our settings. So one of the nice things about the M8 camera is that you've got access to a lot of your manual camera settings. So ISO, exposure, white balance, and so on. You've also got some live previews for different filters, if that's your cup of tea. If we hit the settings, we can take control of our custom camera options. So you can save your presets if you've got a few settings that you particularly like and use a lot, which is pretty handy. And our modes here, we've got quite a few. We've got auto, night mode, HDR, panorama, anti-shake, and so on and so forth. The manual mode is obviously the best of all of those. We'll show you the results of the camera in just a second. As far as health and sports wearable integration, we have Fitbit. Where's Fitbit? Fitbit, right there. So Fitbit, well, I don't have one connected of course, but if you did, then you would have full Fitbit support, as we're seeing with a lot of flagships this year. As for the results of shooting with both, you can see that they're not too bad. There's a little bit of a sort of a milky look going on the M8, and the G3 is a lot more sharp. Obviously you've got way more megapixels on the G3 than you do on the M8. But again, the M8 doesn't shoot bad photos. I think the G3 just shoots better photos. HDR mode outside, both produce decent results, but again, the G3 comes out better. Color reproduction up close, it's pretty fair. There's not too much going on, but if you zoom right in, of course, to some details, you'll start to see the obvious difference in megapixel count. The M8 just starts to lose detail quite quickly. Let's go over. Color reproduction is pretty decent, but again, the G3 sort of picks up color a little bit nicer. This is interesting. You can see on the M8 in the glare on the table that candy just kind of vanishes into a blur, whereas it's a little bit sharper on the G3. And if we zoom right in, you can see there's just a lot more detail again on the G3 than there is on the M8. The M8 consistently sort of shot these slightly milky looking shots. Outside with a bit of contrast, both results were okay. There's not too much in it, but at low light, this is where it got really interesting. Despite the optical image stabilization plus on the G3, the M8 Smart Stabilization did a pretty good job. You can actually see the G3 produce much darker shots than the M8, and if you zoom in, of course, you're going to see the lack of megapixels there. Things are a lot sharper in the G3 up top, but you can also see quite a lot of noise going on in the background there, which just isn't anywhere near as obvious in the M8. It's really interesting. It's going to depend how you like to take your low light photos. If you want something that's going to obviously give you lighter scenes, then you're going to want to look at the M8 because you'll get much lighter shots, but they're going to be a little bit more blurry. Whereas the G3 will give you a lot more noise, but things will be a bit sharper. Up close, obviously the M8 has a macro mode, the G3 does not, but they both shoot pretty decently. There's nothing terribly different going on at close range. And that's about it for cameras. So as far as hardware goes, both are rocking a Snapdragon 801. The G3 has a slightly faster clock speed though, and also has the possibility of 3 gig of RAM, whereas the M8 only comes with 2 gig no matter which version you buy. There's not too much in it though. The M8 is super fast and super snappy, and in benchmark tests it actually outclasses the G3. Let's take a quick look at our Antutu benchmark scores. We don't put too much stock into benchmarking because they're not always the best indicator, but you can see there's a bit of a difference there despite the G3 being brand new and the M8 being out for a little while. Okay, just to give you an idea of how snappy both of the devices are, let's do a quick test. So again, even though it's slightly slower clocked and lower RAM, the M8 responds pretty quickly. You can also see the differences in color here as well. The G3 display is quite nice, but it does come out a little bit more pinkish, and the M8 is super crisp white. I'm not sure if you can pick that up on the video, but of course watching at home on a monitor through a video camera onto a screen, it's obviously going to mess things up a little bit. Okay, so when it comes to speakers, obviously there's nothing that can beat the legendary boom sound on the HTC. We've got the stereo speakers at the top and bottom of the screen. On the G3, we've got the 1 watt speaker mounted on the back, but we won't play any music because copyright and all that. But despite the G3 being nice and loud, it's hard to beat the HTC, and it hasn't done so in this case. So there you go, guys. This was a really tough one. I honestly cannot pick one. I think it's really going to come down to what you prefer. Are you a fan of Plastic Fantastic, or do you love a full metal jacket? In terms of cameras, I mean, the G3 is pretty minimal. Maybe you just want higher megapixels, maybe you want more preset modes. How important is low light to you? The interfaces, it's going to come down to personal preference. Software features, again, I think the G3 is probably a little bit better than the M8, but it's just, seriously, the differences are too varied for me to actually pick a winner. I think I might go for the G3, but I know that Tony, our cameraman, would go for the M8. So you let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video if you have, and check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Google+. Check out the website, and of course, grab the app. Till next time, guys, this is Chris. See you next time on Android Pit.